My name is Teresa Langford. I'm 67 years old, and for the past 38 years, I've been an accountant, the kind who never misses a decimal, never forgets a date, and never gives a dollar away without a paper trail. Until this morning. Because this morning, I woke up to $450,000 missing from my account. I remember the sun was barely up. The house was still quiet. Birds hadn't even begun their song yet. I padded downstairs in my robe, poured a cup of jasmine tea, and sat at the table like I always do, with my late husband's old accounting ledger beside me and the silver button from his army coat that I keep tucked into the cover. I always smile when I touch that button. He used to say, "Tess, in this house, we track truth like we track numbers, carefully, quietly, and with proof." Well, today the proof stared back at me, loud and cruel, on my bank app. Negative $450,000. A withdrawal. Unfamiliar. Unauthorized. Unthinkable. Then, just as my tea was cooling, my phone vibrated. It was a message from my daughter-in-law, Kelsey. "Thanks for the house and the Ferrari, Mom." I sat there, didn't blink, didn't scream, didn't even flinch. I just smiled. It was the kind of smile you make when a puzzle finally snaps into place, and you realize the missing piece wasn't missing. It was stolen. You see, Kelsey had always been charming, always too polished, too perfect. She worked in PR, knew how to spin anything. My son, Jacob, fell head over heels for her. And maybe, in the beginning, I did too. She brought life into the house again after we lost William, my husband. She brought noise, lipstick on wine glasses, photos on the mantle. But she also brought silence. The kind that settles between a mother and son when someone new starts whispering at night, when bank papers go missing, when birthday calls go forgotten, when home visits go from every Sunday to never. Still, I never thought they'd go this far. Not until this morning, when my hand reached for my tea and I saw the steam curl around that silver button, the one William wore on the day we bought this house. The one he touched when he told me, "If anything ever happens to me, don't let them smile in your face while stealing your roof." I should have listened sooner, because now they've taken the roof, and the Ferrari, and my son's voice. But what they don't know is that I smiled because I've already started counting backward. They think I'm slow. They think I'm old. They think I'm alone. But I'm still an accountant, and they forgot. Numbers tell stories, and every story has a ledger, and I've been keeping mine. Tomorrow, they'll come back, maybe with flowers, maybe with apologies. Kelsey will cry. Jacob will stare at the floor. They'll say it was a misunderstanding, that the forms were a joke, that I must have agreed without remembering. But I'll be ready, because I've spent the last 2 weeks testing a theory, just like my husband taught me. I wanted to see how far they'd go if I just loosened the leash. I moved funds around. I left bait, and they bit hard. I closed the banking app, stirred my tea, looked at the silver button again. It's funny how betrayal always arrives when the house is quiet, when grief settles like dust, and people think your silence means surrender. But I've never been the surrendering type. So when Kelsey wrote, "Thanks for the house and the Ferrari, Mom," I didn't answer. I didn't call. I didn't even move. I just sat there smiling. And I whispered, "Tomorrow morning, she'll be outside." Sobbing. But I won't open the door. The first time Kelsey called me, "Mama," I cried so hard I had to pull the car over. She had always called me Aunt T, even after the adoption papers were signed. Even after I gave up my career and moved back to Charleston to raise her. Aunt T felt like a polite fence, one she could hide behind, one that kept her heart just a bit safer. I never forced her to say anything different. But that day, out of nowhere, as I buckled her into the booster seat, She looked at me with those wide sea glass eyes and whispered, "Mama?" I froze. She repeated it, gentler this time. "Mama, is that okay?" I nodded. I couldn't speak. I just held her hand across the console for a minute before starting the engine. It was one of the best days of my life. And yet somehow, that same girl, the one who clung to my skirt during storms and tucked handwritten notes in my purse, was now the woman swiping my card like it was printed for her pleasure. The morning was humid, like most mornings in Charleston. My hands felt clammy as I stepped into the bank, clutching the folder of flagged transactions. The woman at the desk recognized me. "Miss Langford, we were just about to call." "I'm here to go over some activity on my account," I said softly. "It doesn't look like me." We sat down in a small glass office. She pulled up the transactions on a screen. A $12,000 withdrawal for bridal styling and spa week. $4,800 for a pre-wedding shoot in Aspen. $3,900 at a luxury baby boutique, one I'd never set foot in. And 5 separate charges of $2,000 plus at stores I hadn't visited in years. "It's all within your authorized card use, but..." She hesitated. "You've added someone to the account recently. Kelsey Langford?" I nodded slowly. "She has a supplementary card," the woman explained, "marked as emergency-only access." I had almost forgotten. I added it 2 years ago, after she called me sobbing, saying her car broke down late at night on a lonely stretch of highway. I rushed to her. She had no cash. I swore I'd never let her be stranded again. So I walked into this very branch and asked for a supplementary card. "Just for emergencies," I told them. They nodded. "We'll set it with a cap and alert you for anything over $1,000. But somewhere along the way, the cap got lifted. Somewhere along the way, the definition of emergency turned into anything that makes her happy. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my kitchen, alone, just me, the envelope of receipts, and a pot of cold chamomile tea. I remembered selling my wedding ring for her. Kelsey was in her final year at university. Her financial aid got delayed, and tuition was due. I didn't want her to feel that weight. I went to a pawn shop on Rutledge Avenue, took the ring off my finger, and watched the man behind the glass weigh it like it was just metal. It had been my husband's ring. The one he slipped on my finger under the old magnolia tree at our backyard wedding. The man offered me $1,200. I didn't haggle. I took it. Paid the tuition the same day. When Kelsey found out, she cried in my lap. "Mama, no." "Why didn't you tell me?" I shrugged. "You needed help. That's all that matters." She kissed my hands and promised she'd make it all worth it someday. But here we are, years later. And that someday turned into silk gowns, engraved invitations, imported orchids, and me on the sidelines. Watching her spend like I don't feel every dollar. I never said a word. Not when the charges first started piling. Not when I noticed she booked a French patisserie to ship macarons overnight for a bridal tasting. Not even when she posted a photo of her custom shoes with the caption, "A girl only gets married once. Might as well do it like royalty." But silence, I've learned, isn't the absence of knowing. Sometimes it's the only shield you have when love gets weaponized. I looked at the printout again. All the charges, all the moments she took from me without asking. And I heard my own voice, quiet but bitter. I once sacrificed for love. She sacrifices me. For luxury. 3 weeks ago, they came over. Kelsey and Kevin, my only granddaughter and the man who replaced me in her heart. They showed up with pumpkin scones from that expensive bakery on 10th Street, all smiles and cheerful chatter like they were playing house. "Hi, Nana," she said, kissing my cheek, like it was the most natural thing in the world. They settled into my living room like it was theirs, tossing throw pillows aside to make room. Kevin placed the bakery box on the coffee table like a trophy, unwrapping it as if I should be grateful. I made tea. The way I always do. Strong, no sugar, just how her mother liked it. Kevin was the one who brought it up first. So, we've been thinking, maybe it's time to start looking at houses. Kelsey laughed and leaned against his shoulder. We want to find something close to good schools, with a backyard big enough for a swing set. She glanced at me and added sweetly, I mean, not right away. But we're planning. She said we a lot. I noticed that. Kevin took a sip of his tea and looked me dead in the eye. Would you need help with anything around here, Teresa? Anything too big for you to manage? That was his way in. I knew it instantly. I've heard questions like that before, from realtors, insurance agents, probate lawyers, men in suits who smile when they smell vulnerability. I smiled. The pipes are just fine, thank you. And the roof doesn't leak. Kelsey turned her eyes toward the antique hutch. I knew what she was looking at. The silver. It was my mother's. I only bring it out during the holidays. The kind of heirloom you don't see in catalogs. The kind you polish with care, because it carries fingerprints of generations. I watched her eyes rest on the drawer, the second one down. When they left, I walked them to the door. Kevin hugged me, a firm, flat-palmed pat on the back. Kelsey lingered for a second. Do you need anything, Nana? She asked, tone syrupy. Just peace and quiet, I said. They walked out, fingers entwined. I stood in the hallway until I heard their car engine fade down the street. Then I turned, walked back to the living room, and sat. Something felt lighter, not metaphorically, tangibly. I walked to the hutch, opened the second drawer. The old silver carving knife, my mother's, was gone. I didn't scream. I didn't call. I didn't confront. I just closed the drawer quietly and walked to the sink, washed a cup, dried it, put it back. See, some people mistake silence for weakness, but it's not. Sometimes silence is armor. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's restraint. I remembered the day that carving knife came into our home. My father had wrapped it in newspaper and handed it to my mother on their 10th anniversary. It wasn't just a utensil. It was part of every Christmas roast, every Thanksgiving turkey, every family memory stitched with laughter and gravy and voices raised over football. And Kelsey took it like it meant nothing, like it was just a shiny thing she could pawn or photograph for her lifestyle blog. She thought I wouldn't notice. She thought I was just a forgetful old woman in an old house with old things. But I remember. I remember everything. Like the time she called me Mama for the first time, years after her mother died. She was 5, had scraped her knee. I bandaged it with trembling fingers, and she looked at me with those huge eyes and said, Mama? I never corrected her. And now, the girl who once clung to my skirt at bedtime was stealing silver knives and asking if I needed help with the house. It's funny how betrayal doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it tiptoes in wearing smiles and carrying pumpkin scones. So I didn't tell her I knew. I didn't mention the missing knife. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me shaken. No, I waited. Because people who don't think they'll ever regret their actions are often the ones who regret them the most. And when the time comes, when the stage is set, and the curtain lifts, she won't be able to say I didn't notice. Because I did. I just remembered, in silence. The morning after I reviewed the statements, I brewed my coffee a little stronger than usual. It wasn't out of anxiety, just habit. I stood by the window, watching the wind nudge the old pine tree outside. There was a stillness in me, like something had clicked, And now my bones remembered the rhythm of a life where I didn't wait for permission to act. I picked up the phone and found his name in my contacts. Marcus Levine. Last I heard, he was doing well, had passed the bar young, opened a small firm. Sharp mind, sharper memory. And once, long ago, a young man who couldn't afford a decent laptop for law school. So I gave him mine. I tapped call. 3 rings. Hello? His voice hadn't changed. Warm, direct, present. It's Aunt Teresa, I said, calm as the lake behind my house. A pause, just a beat, and then, Aunt Teresa, what do you need done? No pleasantries, no small talk, just that, as if he could hear something in my voice. Or maybe he simply remembered what kind of woman raised him like one of her own when his parents fell apart. I need you to help me reclaim what's mine, I said. Say no more, he replied. We met in person the next morning. He drove in from Charleston, showed up at my porch wearing a navy suit and bringing that same energy, composed, precise, and loyal. He had a legal pad tucked under one arm, but didn't open it until I finished speaking. I laid it out. The supplementary credit card I once gave Kelsey for emergencies only, never used for years until suddenly it was maxed. Jewelry missing. Funds withdrawn in increments just under the red flag threshold. Purchases in Kevin's name. I wasn't entirely sure where the estate's boundary of legality ended and theft began, but I knew enough. Marcus listened without interrupting. He asked for access, documents, statements, anything that looked off. Then he said something that made me realize just how much he'd grown. We're not rushing this, he said. We're documenting. Quietly. Every detail. This will be clean. He set up a secure shared folder, scanned and filed every paper I handed him, even taught me how to upload from my phone. He called the bank to put a soft hold on the account, citing suspicious activity. When they asked if I was sure, I said yes, and that was all. He reached out to a tech consultant he trusted to trace digital footprints. Everything Kelsey had touched, even from her own devices, left trails. I'd never realized my old laptop still had admin access to a shared drive she once used. One file in particular caught Marcus's eye. A spreadsheet of my accounts with little side comments. Next to my retirement fund? This one's just sitting. No one's watching. He didn't show me his expression, but I saw the way his jaw clenched. The silver lining was that I didn't have to play detective. I just had to remember. My job was memory. His was law. And as he worked, I simply made tea, fed the cat, kept to my routine. But everything was different now. Power is quiet when it's real. It doesn't shout or tremble. It doesn't explain itself in kitchens or beg to be understood. It moves like water, finding the cracks, and then widening them until even concrete gives way. One night, Marcus and I sat at the table, sorting through the last of the documents. He looked up from the file and asked, "Do you want to confront them before or after?" "Neither," I said. "They'll confront themselves." He nodded slowly. "You're not afraid." "I'm just not distracted anymore." There was no drama, no raised voices, just process. Marcus filed a motion to reclaim disputed assets under misuse of financial access. He also began drafting a letter to the court to prepare for guardianship contestation, if it came to that. He was 3 steps ahead. But me? I wasn't planning for battle. I was closing windows they thought were doors. And the truth is, there's something powerful about being underestimated. It gives you time to prepare, to gather, to move without noise. I didn't shake when I signed the documents. My hand was steady, like I'd been writing my own name for decades. Because I had. And this time, I was writing it back into my story, exactly where it belonged. The message came just as I finished clipping the last rose. Thanks, Mom. I think the Ferrari suits him. Kevin didn't even bother with a greeting. No, hi, Mom. No, how are you feeling? Just that one smug line. I stared at it on my phone, the sun warming my shoulders, the scent of fresh roses rising from the cut stems beside me. My hands were still gloved, stained with earth, when I read it again. Slower this time. The Ferrari suits him. He was talking about the car, of course. My late husband's 2011 Ferrari California. The one I hadn't seen in 3 weeks. The one Kelsey said was just being taken for a spin. I didn't respond. I set the phone down on the garden bench and bent to gather the trimmings. I pruned my roses every Tuesday, a quiet ritual I kept for myself. The garden was mine, the only space no one tried to take from me yet. The gloves helped. They kept the thorns out. That morning, as I ran the hose over the petals, I'd noticed a few beetles trying to bury into the stalks. Pests came quietly, you see. They made homes while you weren't watching, believing the garden was theirs. You had to know when to use water and when to use shears. Kevin's text, though short, told me everything I needed to know. There was no guilt in his words, no hesitation. Just confirmation that the car, worth over $200,000 even in its current condition, was no longer mine in his mind. It suited someone else now. And he felt entitled to say so. As if I had simply handed it over. As if I had been too old to notice what was happening. And yet, there had been a time when I would have dropped everything for him. For her. My thoughts wandered, against my will, to a cold night years ago. Kelsey was 7. Kevin was off at summer camp, and my husband had flown out for a business conference in Denver. I was working the night shift at the hospital, 12 hours straight. I was bone-tired when I pulled into the driveway, only to find the babysitter gone and Kelsey crying in bed. Her forehead was burning. She'd been vomiting. Alone. I didn't even change out of my scrubs. I called out of my next shift, climbed into bed with her, and held her until dawn. I remember running my hand down her back in slow circles, whispering lullabies, promising she'd be okay. She clung to me like I was the only thing keeping her tethered. And maybe I was. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake in case she stopped breathing. At one point, she looked up at me, eyes glassy from fever, and murmured, "Don't go, Mama." I didn't. Not for hours, not for days, not for the whole week. Now she drives Ferraris and forgets to say hello. I sat back down on the bench and looked up at the sky. A mockingbird perched on the fence, chirping its mimic song. I watched it flit to the top of the trellis, repeating a car alarm sound it had likely picked up from the street below. Even birds, it seemed, were good at pretending. The Ferrari had always been a symbol, not of wealth, but of effort. My husband bought it after 35 years of rising before the sun, managing union disputes, saving every dime. He didn't even drive it often. He just liked to polish it on Sundays. He used to say, "This isn't a car, Risa. It's a reminder of what we didn't have and what we built." Kevin was there when he said it. He nodded solemnly, pretending to understand. But some things aren't inherited. Not values, not memory, not conscience. Only keys. I picked up my phone again. The message was still there, glowing up at me. "Thanks, Mom. I think the Ferrari suits him. No punctuation. Just arrogance." I considered replying. I could have said, "It doesn't belong to you." Or, "Your father would have been ashamed." Or even, "Return it before you're sorry." But instead, I just locked the screen. There are times when silence is louder than any threat. And this was one of those times. I stood, brushing soil off my jeans, and looked at the garden. My roses were in full bloom. Delicate, layered, quietly defiant. The same way I had learned to be. Kevin thought I wouldn't notice, that I was old, soft, forgetful, that I couldn't count the days or track a title deed or remember the inventory of our assets. He was wrong. I noticed the missing documents in the safe. I noticed the altered passwords. And I remembered the little things, like how Kelsey once used to ask me to sing Twinkle Twinkle every night before bed, or how Kevin used to draw race cars on his napkins and dream about driving fast. Now he drives mine and believes I'm none the wiser. But I remember everything, every mile, every fever, every betrayal. And unlike them, I don't forget who earned what. I smiled to myself and walked inside. There would be no reply, only a reckoning. I didn't tell anyone I was going, no calls, no texts. I simply got in my car, turned the key, and drove. There was a strange steadiness in my hands, like my body already knew what my heart refused to admit. The neighborhood they moved into was far from our old quiet lane. Manicured lawns, white fences with little black iron gates, street names that sounded like bottled perfumes, Juniper Grove, Whispering Pines. And then, there it was. A fresh sign in the yard still bore the words, "Just sold, Williams Residence." The ink hadn't even faded. Below it was a wide driveway, clean concrete stretching toward a modern 2-story home, the type with too many windows and not enough soul. I didn't pull in. I parked across the street under a sycamore tree and just watched. Through the front window, I could see the outline of someone, Kelsey, maybe, laughing as she carried in a box. She was in leggings and a designer sweatshirt, phone tucked between her cheek and shoulder. Her voice rang out through the open window. "Yeah, babe. The upstairs closet is all mine." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. The same hands that once washed her tiny socks and onesies now clenched so hard my knuckles ached. A moment later, Kevin stepped out. He looked lighter somehow, like the world owed him something and had just delivered it in full. He pulled a bow off a car parked in the driveway, bright red, shiny, unmistakably a Ferrari. I recognized it. Not from family photos, but from the transaction alert I got 2 days ago. $450,000. Gone, that Ferrari. My fingers hovered over my phone. I didn't lift it. I didn't take pictures. I didn't make calls. I just stared, letting every silent second etch itself into me like a scar. And then, like a cruel echo, I heard my own words, the ones I whispered to Kevin the night he became a father. You don't become a man by earning. You become one by showing up, by choosing your family even when it's hard. He had nodded back then, teary-eyed. Now he smiled at Kelsey, with that same softness, and whispered something in her ear. She giggled and kissed his cheek. Then they disappeared inside. I sat back in the seat, watching the now closed door. And just like that, they were gone. Out of sight, out of care. I should have driven off, but instead I stayed. My mind wandered, not to anger, not even to sadness, but to a moment from 25 years ago. Kelsey was 4, burning with fever. I was 3 weeks into a new role, director of care at the community clinic, a promotion I had worked for 6 years to earn. That night, when the daycare called, I left a meeting mid-sentence, jacket half on, reports flying off the passenger seat as I raced home. I held her all night. Cool compresses, crushed up Tylenol in applesauce, prayers whispered between each shiver of her tiny frame. The next morning, I called the clinic. I stepped down. I told them to give the job to someone who didn't have a child to care for. I never looked back. I thought, love is sacrifice. Love is showing up. Love is giving everything, even when nothing's left. But sitting there in my car, watching them through the tinted glass, I felt the echo of a bitter question creep in. Was it enough? Because now, the same child I cradled through fevers held a mansion deed with her name on it, and believed I wouldn't notice. The same boy I once picked up from school, after he'd been bullied for wearing the same shoes 3 years in a row, just gave away nearly $500,000 for a car, and never thought I'd care. No, not that I'd care, that I'd notice. They truly thought I didn't know, that I was too old, too soft, too forgetful. But I was watching. I saw it all. I heard the laughter. I counted the boxes. I memorized the moment Kelsey placed her hand on Kevin's chest and said, "We earned this." They thought they built it alone. I started the engine. It purred to life. But I didn't drive off right away. I whispered to myself, quietly, steadily, I thought love was giving everything. I never asked what I'd have left. And now I was about to find out. Because somewhere between the garden and this driveway, I stopped being the woman they depended on and became the woman they underestimated. And that would be their mistake. I put the car into gear and drove home, but not before glancing once more at the house I helped build, without a single brick bearing my name. Marcus's text came just after breakfast. "Are you ready to sign, Ms. Langford?" No greetings, no delay, just the question. I stared at my coffee mug, the one with the faded sunflowers, and thought, he used to bring me coffee in that chipped mug when he was an intern. The ride to his office was quiet, just the hum of tires on pavement, and a kind of stillness in me that I hadn't known for years. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the absence of noise, the inner kind that claws and bites when you try to sleep. His office was small, barely larger than the closet where I once kept my coats, but it was clean, precise, like him. Marcus stood as I entered. "You look—" He stopped, eyes softening. "Resolved." "I am," I said, sitting down across from him. He handed me the document. The official request for asset seizure and house repossession, submitted through the firm on behalf of the Langford Family Trust. It was lawful, thorough, brutal in its precision. I looked at the signature line. Teresa A. Langford. I'd signed that name so many times before, on Kelsey's school permission slips, on checks for her ballet lessons, on emergency room admissions when she fell from the treehouse. It had always meant protection, provision, love. Now I was signing it for justice. I didn't hesitate. My pen glided across the paper. I didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't sigh. I simply wrote my name, like someone who had long since buried the need to apologize for doing the right thing. Marcus slid a second set of papers toward me. "These are for the red Ferrari. Asset number 1452-A, registered to the business account, which the audit proved she accessed without authorization." I signed that too. No anger, no drama, just the quiet truth of consequence. As I stood to leave, Marcus walked me to the door. He paused. "She doesn't know yet?" I shook my head. "She will." He nodded. "You're stronger than you think." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Meanwhile, at a house I had only seen from a distance, my daughter was hammering a nail into a wall that was no longer hers. Kelsey stood on a step stool, holding up a framed photo of her and Kevin in Tuscany. Her voice was bright, filled with the illusion of permanence. "Let's put it right here, babe. First thing guests see when they enter." Kevin nodded, steadying the frame. "Feels good, doesn't it? Like we finally have a place that's ours." A knock on the door interrupted their moment. Not a gentle one. It was followed by the sound of a car engine cutting off and the firm, unmistakable cadence of boots on stone steps. Kelsey opened the door with a wide smile until she saw the badge. "Mrs. Langford?" the officer asked, holding a thick envelope. "Yes?" Her voice wavered. "This is a court-issued asset seizure notice." This home, along with the Ferrari 458 Italia parked in the driveway, has been identified as property purchased through unauthorized withdrawals from the Langford family business account. What? She stammered, clutching the doorframe. Kevin stepped behind her. This is a mistake. Her mother gave us that money. The officer shook his head. The account is owned by Langford Interiors, which remains under trust supervision. The transaction was filed under emergency funding, with no board approval. Kelsey's voice cracked. No, this is mine. My mother. Your mother, the officer interrupted gently, has requested formal recovery of misappropriated assets. The seal went up on the door. Bright red, unmistakable. Inside, the air turned thick. The echo of that first nail driven into the wall now hung hollow in the silence. And from across the street, inside my parked car, I watched. I watched as the police walked out with keys in hand, as Kelsey collapsed onto the porch with her hands shaking, as Kevin paced and dialed frantically, eyes wide with disbelief. I didn't move, didn't gloat. I only rolled the window up slowly when the wind picked up, tugging at my scarf. I whispered words no one else could hear. I didn't steal that house from you, Kelsey. I just reclaimed the trust you set on fire. And then I drove away, past the sealed house, past the parked Ferrari, past the dream they stole and tried to rename. The morning air was still, heavy with the kind of silence that precedes a storm. I was pruning the lemon verbena bush by the kitchen window when I saw the tow truck crawl down the street like a predator stalking prey. It stopped outside their new house, my old house, the one Kevin and Kelsey now called home. The driver stepped out, clipboard in hand. He didn't even look around, just walked up to the red Ferrari parked neatly in the driveway. The one with the black leather seats and the gold-plated initials on the steering wheel. KW. The initials of a man who once called me a burden with a pension. Kevin came rushing out in a panic, barefoot and shirtless. Hey, what the hell are you doing? That's mine. The man barely blinked. Court-ordered repossession, sir. Everything tied to the Langford Trust is being audited. This vehicle is part of the freeze. Kevin turned red. You don't understand. That was a gift. The man raised a brow. You may take photos, sir, if you'd like. But I suggest you move. We're behind schedule. Kelsey ran out seconds later, wrapped in a silk robe and panic. Kevin, do something. She clung to his arm like she used to cling to mine as a little girl scared of the thunder. But Kevin didn't offer her comfort this time. He stood frozen, jaw clenched, fists tight, watching as the tow cable latched onto the front axle of his prized Ferrari. The same car he once said symbolized everything he'd earned. No one noticed me. I was parked a few houses down, far enough to stay invisible, close enough to see everything. Kelsey screamed as the front wheels lifted off the ground. This is insane. How can they just take it? Kevin didn't answer. He shook off her hand. She reached for him again, this time grabbing his wrist. Please, fix this. And that's when it happened. He looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time in years. Then slowly, deliberately, he pulled his arm away. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just walked. Down the driveway, past the car, past her, past the life they'd built on someone else's foundation. He didn't even glance back. Kelsey turned to the tow truck, screaming obscenities now, begging, bargaining. The man said nothing, just nodded to the assistant who began tightening the straps. That's when Kevin looked up, finally, and saw my car. Our eyes locked, just for a second. No words, no gestures, just recognition of the power shift. He knew I had done this, and that I had every right to. He walked. Faster I watched him retreat. Not because he was angry, but because he knew there was nothing left for him to claim. Not the car, not the house, not even the moral high ground he used to preach from. He had always been the first to raise his voice. Now he was the first to fall silent. It didn't feel triumphant. It didn't even feel like revenge. It just felt right. I thought of all the years I'd forgiven out of guilt, out of hope, out of blood ties that stretched thinner than I realized. I thought of birthdays alone, of empty calls on Christmas, of silence when I needed comfort. And yet I'd stayed silent. Until now. Now, I didn't need to shout or argue. I didn't need explanations or closure. I just needed the truth to do what it always does. Rise. The Ferrari was fully on the truck bed now. The driver clicked something on his tablet and slammed the door shut. The engine roared. Kelsey dropped to the curb like her knees gave out. Her robe splayed like a fallen flag. But Kevin was gone. Gone before the truck even pulled away. Gone like he was never tethered to this place at all. And in that moment, I understood something. I had always mistaken silence for surrender. But silence, when chosen, deliberately, fully, is power. I didn't need to forgive again. I didn't need to fight. I just needed to walk my own path and let them taste the air without me. I once forgave because of blood. Now I choose silence, so I can finally live. Marcus sat across from me at the long mahogany table, a quiet gravity in his expression. His laptop glowed softly in the dim office, the only light aside from the afternoon sun bleeding through the half-shut blinds. I took the liberty of preparing this, he said, sliding a folder across the table. It covers the last 6 months. I opened it. Page after page, dates, amounts, vendors, categories, all tied to one card, the one I had added Kelsey to years ago, in a moment of love and naivete. For emergency use only, I had said. Medical expenses, unexpected school costs, that was all. But the ledger told a different story. 57 transactions, jewelry boutiques, designer handbags, a weekend spa retreat in Napa, a 5-night stay at a beachfront villa in Maui, personal chefs, private styling, cosmetic enhancements. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. She used the corporate health expense card, Marcus continued gently. The one you specifically noted should only be active for emergencies. Most of these were routed through encrypted merchant codes. It's calculated. I didn't speak. My fingers traced the paper's edge, smooth, cold, sharp. She also made 3 attempts to access the real estate holding accounts, he added. But she didn't have the right credentials. I closed the file. Something in my chest didn't shatter. It shifted, like a piece of armor clicking into place after months of slipping loose. I reached into the desk drawer. The top one, the one I hadn't opened in months. There it was, the photo, taped crookedly inside. Kelsey at 5, missing front teeth, wearing my oversized sunglasses, her arms around my neck, laughing into my cheek. I must have taken that picture after our first beach day together in Charleston. I used to keep it there to remind me what love was supposed to feel like. Unfiltered, safe, worth it. I peeled it off slowly, the tape resisting before surrendering. I held it for a long time, then folded it, once, then again, and set it down beside the file. Not thrown away, not burned, but no longer watching over me from that drawer like a silent plea. I looked up. "Remove her," I said. Marcus blinked. "From which account?" "All of them." His fingers hovered above the keyboard. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I replied. "Effective today." The clacking of his keys was soft but final, like nails gently tapped into a closing door. As he worked, I whispered something. more to myself than to him. When a person believes they have rights over everything you own, they're no longer family. They're a threat. It was the third time I had said those words in the last 2 days. Once in my head, once in the mirror that morning, and now aloud, like drawing a protective circle around my name, my work, my legacy. Kelsey had crossed that line, quietly, methodically, without remorse. I watched Marcus finish typing. He printed the removal confirmation, handed it to me. I signed. The sound of the pen against paper didn't tremble. This wasn't vengeance. This wasn't anger. It was clarity. I stood up and walked toward the window, staring out at the garden below. The roses were blooming again, late but fierce. I had planted them the week my husband died. Each bush a different shade. The one nearest the glass had just opened into a crimson so deep it almost looked black. Funny, I thought. How we teach ourselves to survive. How we grow thorns not to harm, but to protect the bloom. Behind me, Marcus gathered the documents. "I'll ensure her company login is deactivated by end of day," he said, "and I'll begin reassessing account access protocols for all second parties." "Thank you." He paused. "And the photo?" I turned, gently picking it up again. I slid it into a file labeled archived. "Some things aren't destroyed," I said. "They're just put away." He nodded. "Understood." After he left, I sat in my chair and stared at the empty drawer. Love had once lived there. A mother's blind, wide-open love. But love that refuses to evolve becomes dangerous. A force so eager to forgive, it forgets to guard the gates. I wouldn't make that mistake again. Not for her. Not for anyone. The knock came just after dawn. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then came the second. Harder, unsteady. I paused in the kitchen, fingers tightening, around my tea mug. The house was still, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the dull thump that followed. I walked to the door. Through the peephole, I saw her. Kelsey. Her hair was disheveled, the way it used to look when she'd run in from playing in the backyard as a child. Her clothes were wrinkled, clinging to her like they had been slept in. Her shoulders trembled, and her fists pressed desperately against the door, as if her body could convince it to open where her words had failed. "Mom," she stammered, her voice cracking. "Please, I don't know what to do." "I don't know anymore." She wasn't shouting. She wasn't even angry. Her voice was the hollow sound of someone untethered, like a little girl lost in the woods, calling for a mother she forgot she once ignored. I didn't speak. I didn't move. But my hand had found its way to the doorknob. I could feel the cold brass beneath my fingertips, that familiar shape. I had turned it 1,000 times before, opened it to neighbors, delivery men, family, strangers, always quick to welcome, always ready to comfort. I had once opened every door for Kelsey, even when her tone was sharp, even when her absence stretched for months, even when I was an afterthought in her new life, called only when something needed fixing or funding. All it had ever taken was a single tear, hers, not even a real apology. And yet, here I was, still. I leaned my forehead gently against the wood of the door. It was old, scratched from years of grandkids kicking it open with muddy boots. It had heard laughter, arguments, goodbyes, and now, this silence. From the other side, her voice came again, smaller. "I messed up. I know I did. I didn't mean to." A sob. "I just wanted to be enough for once. I just wanted to be seen." She slid down until I could hear her knees touch the mat. Then came the part that broke something deep inside me, not because it hurt, but because it didn't anymore. "Please, Mom. Just tell me what to do. I'll listen now." That was the thing. She should have listened before she burned down every bridge between us. But some people only start looking for a map after they've thrown it into the fire. I took a breath, deep and steady. Inside me, the war raged. Between the mother who had once dropped everything for a scraped knee or a bad dream, and the woman who had rebuilt herself in silence, who had counted every betrayal in sleepless nights and tear-stained pillows. And now, that woman, me, stood still. I thought of the photos she had deleted, the transactions she had hidden, the moment she looked me in the eye and said I was just overreacting. And I thought of that little girl I once held in my arms, the baby whose hand wrapped around my finger and made me believe I'd never be alone again. I whispered, only to myself, I used to open every door for just one tear. But now, I choose to stand. Still, she didn't hear it, but maybe she felt it. I turned away. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I didn't gloat. I simply walked back toward the kitchen, toward the mug of tea that had long since gone cold. Behind me, through the wood and silence, I could hear her breathing hitch. Then, a low, hollow sound of her body folding forward, forehead resting on the welcome mat, the one that once read, "Family is everything." And for a time, I let her sit there, not out of cruelty, but because healing doesn't begin with someone opening the door for you. It begins when you realize it's been locked for a reason, and that maybe, just maybe, you should have never walked out in the first place. I poured my tea into the sink, reboiled the kettle, and sat down at the kitchen table. She was still out there. But this time, I wouldn't be the one to invite her in. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not because of the air conditioning, but because of the stillness. You could hear the rustling of fabric when someone shifted in their seat. The bailiff's boots echoed like thunder on marble floors. Even the judge's gavel, when it finally dropped, didn't feel like a command. It felt like a line being drawn. Kelsey sat 2 rows ahead of me, flanked by her attorney and her silence. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her makeup toned down to a shadow of her usual self. But even then, I saw the tremble in her shoulders. She didn't look at me, not once. Marcus stood at the front of the room, calm, clear. Every document he held was stacked with precision, every statement sharp but never cruel. He began, "Your Honor, today we present preliminary findings showing misuse of company funds totaling over $400,000, withdrawn or charged through unauthorized transactions over a 6-month period. The individual responsible, Miss Kelsey Langford, had no legal authority to access said funds, nor any fiduciary role in the business." A murmur swept through the courtroom. Journalists were already scribbling. A reporter from the Charleston Chronicle looked up and whispered something to the woman beside him. I knew this would make headlines. Philanthropist's daughter on trial. Family fortune in question. But I didn't care about the articles. I cared about the truth, standing on its own legs. Kelsey's lawyer interjected, citing miscommunication and lack of clear boundaries within the family business. But Marcus held up a document signed by Kelsey herself, an NDA from 2 years ago, acknowledging she held no role in operations and had no spending rights. His voice didn't waver. He was the only person in that room who knew just how hard this was for me. And yet I sat still. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. Behind me, someone slipped into the bench. I turned slightly, not out of fear, but out of instinct. Brenda, my assistant, my second set of eyes, my quiet witness to every betrayal. She wore a navy, blue coat, simple earrings, and that same unshakable steadiness she always carried. She sat without a word, hands folded in her lap, a silent promise of presence. Brenda had been with me through it all. through long nights in the hospital when my late husband couldn't sleep, through budgeting meetings when I questioned if the business would survive another quarter, through Kelsey's wedding, where Brenda helped set the flowers when the vendor canceled, and now, through this. I watched the judge as she leaned slightly forward. The evidence will be reviewed and entered into record. The defense may submit their counter-evidence in writing before the next hearing. This court is adjourned for today. The sound of chairs scraping back was like a slow wave crashing against a wall of tension. Kelsey finally turned then, briefly. Her eyes scanned the room, and for a moment, just a moment, they locked with mine. There was no fury in them, no apology either, just disbelief, like she still didn't understand how things had escalated this far. And maybe she didn't. Maybe some part of her thought I would always protect her, that no matter what she did, I would make excuses, cover for her, let her back in. But I had finally learned that protecting someone isn't the same as enabling them, that love doesn't mean immunity from consequence. Brenda leaned toward me as we stood. She whispered, "You did the right thing." I nodded, but right never felt this heavy. As we walked out of the courtroom, the whispers followed us. Strangers looked. Reporters raised their cameras but said nothing. The spectacle wasn't loud, but it was suffocating. 1,000 silent verdicts before the gavel even dropped. But I didn't shrink from them. I walked straight, chin level, my heels echoing down the hallway like punctuation marks to every line I had finally drawn. I glanced sideways at Brenda. She smiled, soft but proud. Some daughters are chosen, not by blood, but by heart. And in that moment, I knew I hadn't lost a daughter. I had just remembered who one really was. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was standing alone. I watched as Brenda adjusted the microphone on the witness stand. Her hands didn't tremble. Her back was straight. There was a kind of grace in her presence. Not loud, not rehearsed, just steady. The kind of steadiness I had clung to during years when everything else was falling apart. "State your full name, please," Marcus said. "Brenda Collins," she replied. "Executive assistant to Mrs. Teresa Langford for the past 13 years. I leaned slightly forward in my seat. Not because I needed to hear her better, but because I needed her to see me, just in case her voice faltered. It didn't. Marcus gave her a nod. "Can you tell the court what you personally observed in relation to the plaintiff's role as a mother?" Brenda glanced toward me, then at Kelsey, who sat across the aisle, eyes down, lips tight. "I'd be glad to," she said. "I was there the day Mrs. Langford asked if she could bring in a second desk to the corner of her office. When I asked why, she said, 'So my daughter can do her homework near me after school.' That desk stayed for 7 years. Even after Kelsey stopped showing up, someone in the audience shifted in their chair. The air in the courtroom was still, like no one dared to breathe too loud. Brenda continued. She'd sleep in that office some nights. Not because the job demanded it, but because Kelsey did. I remember she had this old blanket she'd bring from home, and she'd ask me to keep the lights dim so Kelsey could rest on the couch while she worked. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded slip of paper. This is a copy of the receipt from Sugar Bell Bakery. Every March 19th for 9 straight years, Mrs. Langford ordered a custom chocolate strawberry cake. She never forgot Kelsey's birthday. I know because she always asked me to pick it up. Same place, same frosting design. Even after Kelsey stopped showing up to collect it? A murmur rippled through the audience. The judge gave a sharp look, and it died down. Brenda's voice softened. She never missed sending a birthday card or a graduation gift. I know because I mailed them. I wrapped them. I watched her sign each one, and every time she hesitated. like she was afraid it might be the last chance she had to say, "I love you." I looked across the aisle. Kelsey had lifted her head, just slightly. Her eyes were red-rimmed, lips trembling. She wouldn't look at me. Brenda's tone shifted, firmer now. I've worked for powerful women, ruthless women. But Mrs. Langford, she's not one of them. She's not a saint either. She's a woman who tried, every single day. She worked 80-hour weeks and still asked about her daughter before she asked about the quarterly reports. The silence in the courtroom deepened. Marcus stepped forward. "Brenda, if I may ask, why are you testifying today?" She inhaled slowly. "Because I've watched this woman be slandered in public. Called cold, called selfish. And the truth is, I've never met a woman who gave more of herself, without being asked, without being thanked." She looked directly at Kelsey now. She is the kind of woman anyone would dream of having as a mother. And the tragedy is, the one person who actually had her forgot how lucky she was. Kelsey's hand rose to her face. She wiped a tear, but others followed. There was no noise, just the steady ticking of the courtroom clock and the weight of something beginning to crack, something deep, maybe even sacred. Marcus nodded toward the bench. No further questions. The judge's gavel tapped once. "Witness may step down." Brenda left the stand and returned to her seat behind me. As she passed, she paused, just long enough to place a hand on my shoulder. No words. She didn't need them, because in that moment, everyone in that room, including Kelsey, understood. Sometimes, it's not the blood that remembers your birthdays. It's the ones who choose to. The courtroom fell silent as Marcus stood and gently approached me. He didn't look at me like a lawyer. He looked at me like the son I never had, respectful, protective, and calm. "Mrs. Langford," he began, his voice clear but not sharp. "You've been asked this before, but the court needs to hear it from you directly. Why didn't you drop the charges against your daughter?" I looked at him, then at the judge, then at Kelsey, her head still low, her shoulders still stiff. And finally, I looked at the jury. 12 strangers, waiting to decide something I had wrestled with alone for months. I took a breath. "For 28 years, I've been her mother," I said. "I changed every diaper. I packed every lunch. I stayed up through every fever. I left work early to make every recital, every play, every failed math test. I paused and let my gaze drift to the audience. I knew some of them. Church women. A couple of former students from the school where I volunteered. But most were strangers, and I spoke to them too. I'm not standing here today because I stopped loving my daughter," I continued. "I'm here because after nearly 3 decades, I've realized love, real love, sometimes means doing the hardest thing of all." Marcus's voice was soft. "What thing is that, Mrs. Langford?" I looked down, let the tears sting but not fall, letting them face the truth on their own. I turned back to the jury, my voice gaining steadiness with each word. Kelsey didn't just take money. She didn't just sign my name. She didn't just ignore my calls. She mocked my trust. She saw my name, the name her father left in his will, and she erased it like it didn't matter. My hands trembled slightly on the witness stand, but I didn't hide them. I let everyone see. I wasn't made of steel. I was made of every exhausted night and every hopeful morning only a mother knows. "I've forgiven her for so many things," I said, my voice lowering. "When she dropped out of college the first time, I forgave her. When she screamed at me in the hospital after her father died, I forgave her. When she told me I ruined her wedding by wearing blue, yes, even that, I forgave." The courtroom gave a soft ripple of awkward laughter. It broke something open, a kind of shared understanding, a glimpse into how long this pattern had been playing. I turned slowly toward Kelsey. She still didn't meet my eyes. "But there comes a moment," I said quietly, "when a mother has to stop apologizing for not being the version her child imagined, when she has to stop paying for love that never arrives." Marcus stepped back slightly, giving me space, letting me carry this one myself. "So no," I said, louder now. "I didn't drop the charges. Because this time, it wasn't just money, it was identity, it was legacy, it was the principle that a woman, any woman, deserves to be treated as more than a stepping stone to someone else's dream." I could feel the jury listening harder now, not just hearing words, but weighing them. "And if I don't protect my name, my worth, my boundary," I continued, "then what lesson would I leave for her children? For my granddaughter?" I felt the tears in my throat now, not of sadness, but of moral clarity. "I am not sending my daughter to prison," I said, turning again to the judge. "I'm just no longer standing between her and the consequences she chose." I looked down for a moment, then back up. I did not push her off a cliff. But I also won't break my back catching her one more time while she laughs. A quiet gasp rose from somewhere in the back. Perhaps it was a mother, or maybe a woman who finally heard someone say aloud what she never could. I leaned forward, my voice low and slow now, meant only for those who were truly listening. We always think unconditional love means always saying yes, but sometimes it means standing up and saying no, not out of anger, but out of faith. Faith that maybe, just maybe, they'll grow when we stop saving them. Silence. Even Kelsey looked up for a second. And that's when I knew. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about punishment. This was about ending the cycle. The judge cleared her throat. Marcus nodded to me and said nothing more. He didn't need to, because the room had heard. And I had finally stopped speaking for my daughter. I had spoken, at last, for myself. The room was still. Not the kind of stillness that comes with peace, but the kind that settles right before a thunderstorm. Except this time, the storm had already passed, and I was still standing. The judge's voice was even, measured. "Kelsey Whitmore, you are hereby sentenced to 6 years of probation with supervised conditions. Additionally, you are forbidden from contacting or approaching Teresa Langford for a period of 10 years. 6 years, 10 years, no handcuffs, no jail cell. But to her, it might as well have been a life sentence." I heard her gasp before I saw her fall to her knees. "No, no, please," she cried out. "I didn't mean, Mom, please." That word, Mom. It echoed off the cold walls and landed right in the center of my chest. The courtroom didn't flinch, but I did, only on the inside. I didn't turn to look at her. I didn't offer a nod, a glance, not even the familiar reflex to help when she cried out. Instead, I felt Marcus's hand rest gently on my shoulder, grounding me. It wasn't comfort, it was respect. I didn't need to be held. I needed to be heard. But I had already spoken. I had already stood up and told the truth, even when every fiber of my maternal instincts begged me to shield her. She sobbed harder. "Mom, please, Mom, say something. Please say something." My hands stayed folded in my lap. My eyes stared straight ahead. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't in years. Stillness. Not numbness. Not coldness. Stillness. And clarity. 10 years. It sounded final. It sounded cruel. But the cruelest part was that the distance between us, emotionally, had started long before the judge made it official. 10 years ago, she stopped listening. 8 years ago, she stopped visiting. 5 years ago, she started lying. And last year, she started stealing. All I did was stop pretending I didn't see it. All I did was remove the net. Now she was falling, and the only voice she was calling for was mine. I breathed in, softly, quietly. Then I whispered, not to the judge, not to the courtroom, but to myself. "You used to call for me when you were scared, Kelsey," I murmured. I could feel her eyes on me, even if I didn't look. "Today," I whispered, "I'm not scared anymore." The words weren't laced with venom. There was no revenge, no power play, just release, just peace. For so long, I was afraid of being seen as the mother who abandoned her child. Today, I knew the truth. I didn't abandon her. I had simply stepped out of the way. I wasn't pushing her away. I was stepping aside and letting her meet the consequences she had chosen. Marcus gave my shoulder one last squeeze, then stepped back respectfully. I felt the courtroom slowly begin to stir again, papers rustling, footsteps echoing, whispers bouncing between walls. But I remained still. I had no celebration in my heart, no relief, no vengeance, just breath and silence. She had said she never thought I'd go through with it, but what she never understood was that this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the part of myself I had slowly given away, year after year, excuse after excuse, apology after apology. A decade apart doesn't just stretch space, it changes people. And somewhere in those 10 years, I changed. I had spent so long fighting to keep the door open. Today it was closed, not slammed, not locked, just gently closed. And sometimes that's the most merciful thing a mother can do. I never talk about Darlene. People knew I had a sister, sure, but no one ever really asked what happened to her, and I never offered. It's easier, I guess, to pretend she faded away like a song you forget the words to. But she didn't fade. She burned. I was 24. She was 22. We were renting a little duplex in Charleston, still figuring life out. I was working nights as a nurse's aide. She was waitressing, bouncing between dreams. That night, she had a migraine. I told her not to light candles, not with how tired she was. But the power had gone out in half the block, and she was scared of the dark. By the time I got home, the flames were already licking through the windows. They said she passed in her sleep, probably from smoke inhalation before the fire ever reached her body. That's what the coroner told me, but I never forgave myself for not being there. Never forgave myself for not checking if we had new batteries in the flashlight drawer. For working overtime when she said she felt off. 2 weeks later, I got custody of her daughter. Kelsey was 3. Everyone praised me. "You're so strong, Teresa," they'd say. "She's lucky to have you." And yes, I took the compliments, but they didn't know. I wasn't raising a child. I was preserving a piece of someone I couldn't bring back. Every birthday party, every scraped knee, every lullaby. I did it not just for Kelsey, but for Darlene. I kept her spirit alive the only way I knew how, by making sure her daughter never felt the void she left behind. And I never dated seriously again. Oh, I tried. There were men. A few good ones even. One, his name was Robert, proposed when Kelsey was 8. He was kind. He brought her little model horses and strawberry ice cream on Tuesdays. He was patient with me. But one evening, Kelsey, who had been quiet all week, finally said, "Is he going to take you away from me like Mommy went away?" Robert heard her, and something shifted in him. A week later, he called off the engagement. "She's not ready," he told me, "and maybe neither are you." He was right. I tucked the ring away in a drawer I never opened again. Told people we grew apart. Told myself that Kelsey came first, and that love would always be second. But deep down, I knew. I didn't just lose Darlene in that fire. I lost myself too. And here's something I've never said out loud. Not to Marcus, not to Pastor Kelly, not even to the walls of my bedroom when I talked to the night. I resented that child. I loved her, God knows I did. But I resented her. Because every time she called me mom, it reminded me that I wasn't. Every time she asked why she didn't look like me, I had to invent stories about distant relatives. Every school project about family trees was a landmine I had to navigate, pruning branches that didn't belong but couldn't be ignored. And then she grew up. And she forgot. She forgot that I gave up more than sleep. I gave up a future. I gave up Robert. I gave up being a woman in my own right so I could be her anchor. When she stole my money, it wasn't just betrayal. It was confirmation of every fear I buried under bedtime stories and scraped knees. That maybe love, even the kind forged through tragedy, isn't always enough. She didn't just steal my name. She stole the life I built from the ashes of my sisters. But here's the other part, the one I've also never said. I don't regret it, not a single day. If I had to do it all over again, I would still run into that courthouse and sign the custody papers. I would still braid her hair for the first day of school. I would still cancel my wedding and hand back the ring. I would still be her mother, even when she forgot who I was to begin with. Because loving Darlene meant protecting her child. And that was the promise I made. Not to Kelsey, but to my sister, the day they lowered her into the ground. Still, I can't help but wonder, what would have happened if I had told the truth earlier? If I hadn't smiled through birthdays and boyfriends and baby showers with gritted teeth and a hollow heart? Maybe if I had admitted I was lonely, I wouldn't be sitting alone in this quiet house, sorting through memories no one else remembers. Maybe I'd still have a daughter who understood who raised her. Or maybe this was always where the fire was leading, not to destruction, but to revelation. The morning I packed up the house felt eerily quiet, like the world was holding its breath. Each room whispered back memories in the dust I stirred. I had never heard my footsteps echo like this before. Not in this house. It had always been full of voices, clinking dishes, laughter I cooked into meals even when no one stayed to eat. But that day, it was just me and the sound of letting go. I started in the hallway closet. Boxes labeled Christmas, baby clothes, and Darlene lined the top shelf. I didn't touch Darlene's box. Some goodbyes stay where you left them. What I needed now was mine to carry. In my bedroom, I opened the old dresser I hadn't touched in years. At the back of the drawer, nestled beneath yellowing linen napkins and mismatched socks, was the small wooden box James gave me on our second anniversary. His initials were still carved in the corner, J.H., crooked and bold. Inside, I found the old button from Kelsey's coat, the one she lost at the grocery store when she was 6. We'd searched every aisle, every cart, until she cried herself to sleep in my arms. I'd sewn another one on, but I kept the original when I found it a week later, tucked beneath the car seat. It was scratched, faded, nothing special to the world, but I'd held on to it for 40 years, as if the act of keeping it made me a better mother. I turned it over in my palm, felt the smoothness worn from years of clinging. Then, with trembling hands, I placed it back inside the box, closed the lid gently, and tied it with twine. I didn't need to carry it anymore. I had survived the story it belonged to. The kitchen was hardest. The counters where I rolled out dough, the oven where I burned the first Thanksgiving pie, the drawer that still stuck whenever you opened it too fast, the table, wobbly leg and all, where Kelsey once told me she hated me because I wouldn't let her skip school for a boy, where she later cried over that same boy when he left her, where she signed birthday cards without looking up from her phone, where, one year, I waited with a homemade cake and 3 lit candles, alone. I walked to the living room window. The wind pressed against the glass, and I saw the yard where Brenda and I once planted roses. They'd bloomed last spring, brighter than any year before, I thought it was a sign then. Maybe it still is. Brenda arrived mid-morning, her truck rumbling up the driveway like an old friend with good timing. She didn't ask questions, just started folding linens, stacking books, and taping boxes. At one point, she held up an old lamp and said, "This one's seen some stories, huh?" I smiled. More than we'll ever tell. It was when we loaded the final box into the back of her truck that Brenda stopped and turned to me. I stood in the doorway, keys dangling from my fingers, heart oddly still. "You okay?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. I looked behind me at the house, the chipped paint on the banister, the front door Kelsey once slammed in my face, the rug James and I picked out during a Labor Day sale, the wall where I marked Kelsey's height each year with a pencil. "It's strange," I finally said. "It looks smaller now." Brenda nodded. Sometimes the weight makes it feel bigger than it is. She reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "You know, this house, it's just a place. You, Teresa, you're the home. You've always been the home I felt something in me swell, then break gently. No tears, just space where something heavy had been." She climbed into the truck, and I lingered one last time. The sun had shifted. It bathed the porch in gold. I stepped out, closed the door softly behind me, and didn't look back. Not because there was nothing worth remembering, but because I had already remembered it all. And that was enough. The microphone crackled softly as I stepped up to the podium. My hands didn't shake, though they used to, back when I still felt the need to be small in every room I entered. Not today, not anymore. The hall wasn't massive, but every seat was taken. Women, mostly my age or older, filled the rows with quiet anticipation. A banner above read, "Healing with Grace, Boundaries, Forgiveness, and Letting Go." It was Brenda's idea to have me speak. "You lived this, Grandma," she'd said. "Not from books." From bone and breath, I adjusted the mic, took a breath, and began. "My name is Teresa Langford," I said. "I'm a mother, a grandmother, a retired nurse, and for over 60 years, I believed that loving someone meant letting them take all they needed from me." A few nods, a few eyes already glassy. "I want to talk about something people don't like to say out loud, especially not mothers. I want to talk about what happens when love becomes erasure, when forgiveness becomes permission, when silence becomes a language for pain." I paused. The room leaned in. "I don't hate my son," I said clearly. "I want to be very honest about that. I don't carry hate in my body anymore. It's too heavy. But I also no longer carry the burden of making myself small so others can feel big." Somewhere near the second row, a woman dabbed at her cheek. "My son told me I was a burden. After I raised him. After I loved the child that wasn't mine by blood as if she were carved from my own ribs. After my husband passed, I was still trying to be the glue I inhaled. Let it out slowly. My voice didn't tremble. And then one day I realized I wasn't holding a family together. I was just holding my breath. Silence. "I forgave him," I said, "but not so he could feel better. I forgave him so I could stop bleeding into people who only handed me Band-Aids." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and I set boundaries. Not walls, not punishments, boundaries. I chose not to be a doormat. I chose not to show up to be used up. I looked out at them, dozens of women who looked like they'd lived 5 lives in one skin. Some were nodding, some frozen, some closing their eyes. "Forgiveness has boundaries," I repeated. "You can let go and still walk away." A soft sound, a cough, a breath caught. Then, from the 5th row, a woman with silver-streaked hair slowly stood up. Her cardigan slipped slightly off one shoulder. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were sharp. "Can I ask something?" she said. I nodded. Do you regret it? Her question held no malice, just gravity. Not going back. Not giving another chance. Do you regret drawing the line? It was quiet. Even the air conditioner seemed to hush. I looked at her, and then I looked at every single face in that room. No, I said. I don't regret leaving the door closed when someone kept slamming it on my fingers. A low gasp. But, I added, I do regret one thing. You could hear the breath being held. I regret not learning how to love myself sooner. I regret every year I thought my worth depended on how much I could sacrifice. I regret every time I taught people to take me for granted, because I was the one handing them the rulebook. The woman's lips parted. Then she sat, slowly, as if the answer had released something in her shoulders. I leaned slightly closer to the mic, my voice softer now. We don't talk enough about quiet strength, about love with boundaries, about healing that doesn't mean returning to the fire that burned us. I scanned the room. So many eyes, so many unshed tears. If you're sitting here wondering whether you're cruel for saying no, you're not. If you're questioning whether it's okay to protect your peace, it is. And then I gave them what I had wished someone had said to me years ago. You are not selfish for choosing yourself. You are sacred, and you are enough. A single clap broke the silence, then another, and suddenly the room was standing. Applause rolled over me like ocean waves, but I didn't cry. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't need permission to stand in my truth. I just needed to speak it. 2 weeks after the seminar, I was sitting on the porch of my new rental, an old farmhouse with chipped white paint and lilacs blooming along the fence, when I saw the car. Black, shiny, out of place among the gravel and wild grass. Kevin stepped out slowly, like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. He looked thinner than I remembered. There was gray in his hair now. His tie was loose, shirt wrinkled, like he hadn't slept. He didn't walk all the way up, just stood near the gate and said, "May I talk to you, Mrs. Langford?" I stayed seated. "You already are." He hesitated. Then finally, "Kelsey's not well." I looked at the sky. The clouds were low, threatening rain. "She's lost weight. She's not eating, barely sleeping. She's withdrawn from her friends. She keeps staring at her phone, hoping you'll call." I didn't reply. "She made a mistake," he said, softer now. "She thought pushing you away would prove something to me, that she could set boundaries, but it wasn't supposed to mean forever. She's been crying non-stop since she found out about the ticket and the truth." I finally stood up, walked slowly to the railing. "She was proud of herself," I said, "when she told me to leave. When she said I was just a burden with a pension. She looked right at me and didn't flinch." Kevin winced. "She was angry. I cut in. "And what were you? When she said that, where were you?" He looked away. I didn't know what to say. "No," I said. "You knew what to say. You just didn't want to say it in front of her." Kevin stepped closer, now at the foot of the porch. "Please, she needs help. She needs her mother." I studied his face. He wasn't a bad man, just a weak one. The kind that disappears when things get uncomfortable. "Kevin," I said gently, "do you remember when I broke my hip?" He nodded. "You said, 'We're not your nurses,' and shut the door on me. Kelsey didn't argue. You both left me crawling on the kitchen floor." For 8 hours, his face turned pale. I didn't think—" "You didn't," I agreed. "You didn't think, and you didn't care. Until now. Until it's messy, and you need me to fix it." He swallowed hard. "She's your daughter." "She was. She still is. But that's not the question you should be asking." He frowned. "Then what is?" I took a slow breath. The wind picked up, rustling the trees. The question is, when I was on the ground, sobbing and bleeding, where was the love then? Where was family then? He had no answer, just silence. I'm not angry anymore, Kevin, I said, stepping down the porch steps. I'm not even bitter. I've just learned the cost of giving all of me to people who only take. He blinked fast, eyes glossy. She's not strong like you. She needs. I shook my head. No. Don't say that. Don't put that on me. When she abandoned me, you didn't tell her to stop. When she mocked my cooking, you laughed. When she threw out the photo of her father, you didn't flinch. You made your choice. Kevin looked like a child. Small. Exposed. I'm not here to punish, I added. But I'm also not here to fix what I didn't break. He was trembling slightly. She keeps saying she's sorry. She just wants one more chance. I stared at the garden beds lining my porch. I'd planted rosemary and lavender. They were small still, but growing. Tell her I said this, I said quietly. When she left me with nothing, I learned to build from the ground. When she turned away, I learned to face myself. When you both walked out, I learned to walk toward peace. Kevin looked stunned. And then I delivered the last line I had carried with me for months. When you ran, Kevin, I said, I stood still. Now that I've found my ground, don't come teaching me how to love. His shoulders slumped. He nodded, slowly. I understand, he whispered. I turned and went back up the porch, not slamming the door, just letting it click shut behind me. There was tea waiting inside, a journal, a half-knitted scarf, and peace. The envelope arrived on a Monday morning. No return address, just my name written in a hand I hadn't seen in years, half familiar, half trembling. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I set down my watering can, hands damp with soil and rose dew, and stared at it like it might dissolve. I took it inside, sat at the kitchen table, and laid it next to my teacup. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I stared out the window, where the morning light stretched over my little garden like a soft blanket. The roses were in bloom, resilient and stubborn, even after last week's storm. Eventually, my fingers moved. I opened the envelope slowly, carefully, like peeling back old bandages. Inside was a letter. Dear Mom, I don't know if I have the right to call you that anymore. Maybe I never did the way I should have, but I'm writing to say something I couldn't say when I had your voice in front of me or your eyes looking through me. First of all, no. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I think that's something people earn, not request like favors. What I want to do instead is give you something, the truth, and I hope, someday, you'll receive it the way I mean it. You were right to walk away, and I was wrong in more ways than I can count. My hand tightened slightly as I turned the page. When you left, I was angry. At you, at Kevin, at myself. But mostly, I was confused. You were always the soft place I thought I could fall, even when I kicked and blamed you. When that softness disappeared, I didn't know who I was without it. The first few weeks in the court-ordered rehabilitation center were a blur of denial. I swore at the staff. I sulked through sessions. I rolled my eyes at the counselors who talked about emotional accountability. But something shifted one night when I met another woman, a mother of two, who had nearly lost her youngest child after a binge. She wasn't sobbing or seeking pity. She just sat there, quiet, sharing how her children called her unsafe. And for the first time, I saw myself through someone else's wreckage. That's when I realized I wasn't just ungrateful. I was dangerous. To your peace, your healing, your dignity. I paused, blinking back something warm. The air felt heavier. Since then, I've been working really working. They have a program here where we speak to high school students about the importance of boundaries, respect, and recognizing emotional labor in our caregivers. I never thought I'd be that person, but when I tell those teenagers about a woman I once called burden while she limped through recovery, they go quiet. And when I share how that same woman once made chicken soup for me at midnight after a heartbreak, I see something flicker in their eyes. I think they feel it. That guilt, that gratitude, that deep down hope they haven't broken everything yet. I tell them love isn't measured by how much you take, but how much you honor. My eyes welled up, but I didn't wipe them. You taught me that by stepping back. You taught me by saying no, not out of anger, but out of love for yourself. I don't know what your days are like now. I don't even know if you'll read this, but if you do, I just want you to know. I get it now. And I'm sorry it took me this long. The last line was written more shakily, as if she'd cried through it. Love, Kelsey. I sat still for a long time. No music, no ticking clock, just the slow hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirping of a bird outside the screen door. I folded the letter gently, then placed it beside my tea. I didn't cry. Not exactly, but I breathed a little deeper. I thought about all the nights I'd whispered prayers into my pillow. All the mornings I'd searched her face for signs of softness, for the little girl I once held. And maybe, just maybe, this letter was a sign that the little girl had found her way back to herself. I didn't rush to write back. I didn't pick up the phone. Some things don't need fast answers. Some things just need to be felt. I sipped my tea, closed my eyes, and let that letter sit beside me, like a quiet visitor I'd been waiting to hear from all along. I sat quietly in my new apartment, a modest but sun-filled corner on the 3rd floor, with a balcony that overlooked a row of blush-pink roses I had planted myself. They weren't fancy or expensive, but they bloomed resiliently, almost defiantly, much like the woman who now watched them grow. The kettle had just finished its soft whistle. I poured myself a cup of chamomile, tea, the kind I used to brew for others without ever drinking myself. This time, the steam curled for me and only me. No footsteps storming down a hallway, no one calling me a burden, no, "Mom, can you help just this once?" No shadows of shame or silence, just stillness, soft sunlight, and the gentle warmth of something earned. As I stirred in a spoonful of honey, a notification lit up my phone. It was from Brenda. Brenda, text. Just wanted to say we finalized another contract this morning. The foundation's growing, and so are the women we're helping. Do you still have time to celebrate wins like this? I smiled, my fingers pausing over the keyboard. A different me might have felt hesitant. But the woman I had become? She didn't shrink for others anymore. I typed slowly, letting each word settle before I hit send. Me, text. I do. For the first time in a long time, I'm living, not just surviving. I took a sip of tea. It was warm, floral, grounding. The framed photo of my late husband sat near the window. Not in sorrow anymore, but in quiet partnership, as if he were nodding from wherever he was, saying, "Took you long enough, T." Kevin hadn't written again. Kelsey hadn't shown up unannounced, and I no longer needed them to. The name on the lottery ticket was still mine. So was the name on the deed to this apartment. So was the name on the foundation's paperwork. Teresa Langford, woman, widow, mother, sometimes misunderstood, sometimes called too firm, but always, undeniably, her own person. Sometimes people ask why I didn't give my son a second chance, or why I didn't let Kelsey explain herself more, or if I felt guilty cashing in a fortune when my own family felt like strangers. And to those people, I say this. Have you ever poured a hot cup of tea for someone else, even when your own hands were trembling? Because I have. For decades. And now? I sip slowly. I breathe deeply. I live truly. And if you're still watching this story, maybe you're wondering the same thing I once did. Am I too harsh for saying no? For walking away? For not answering one more plea or knock? Or maybe, just maybe, you're beginning to ask the better question. Was I simply on time, returning to myself? And to you, dear listener, do you think I was too firm? Or finally, just enough? Let me know in the comments. I'll be reading, one quiet sip at a time.